6.3 million indirectly created jobs in this industry. That is for building office buildings, transport, the 24/7 food outlets, security guards, and all that. So it is becoming quite an interesting and important industry for the country, because we have 4 million people who come into the middle class in this developing country in just a few years. And we have healthy growth rates. So at the moment, we do not see that this will taper off anytime soon. If we look at the composition, we have about 2/3 of this industry in the voice sector, or also call centers or contact centers. Interestingly, this segment keeps growing by 14 to 15% a year, whereas the non-voice, which is 1/3 of the employment, is growing even faster at 17 to 18%. I put including KPM. KPM is knowledge process management. It's the higher value work that is done other than ordinary transactional business process outsourcing. Last year, this industry brought in $22 billion in gross revenue for the Philippines. It is becoming really important for the country as revenue earner. I can say it compares to remittances from overseas Filipino workers at $26 billion last year. But since our growth rates in this industry are higher than that of the remittances, in a few years we will actually overtake the remittances and become the second largest revenue earner after export of semiconductors and electronics. So as I mentioned, we have good growth rates, 15 to 17% per year. This has been the case the last several years. We don't see this stopping. It is a sunrise industry for the Philippines, because this actually now makes up about 7% of the Philippine GDP. So it is beginning to get the attention of government. And we believe that we are ideally suited as an English-speaking nation, a large population. We have what we term the demographic sweet spot, in the sense that there are more than 40 million Filipinos in the workforce, and they are fairly young. They are self-taught on IT and social media tools, etc. So we're in a pretty neat position to increase the share of GDP. And finally, on this slide, we can say that the IT and business process management segment today makes up about 15% of the total outsourcing market. India is by far the biggest player in the outsourcing and offshoring market globally, but we have achieved a 15% market share. I should add that it's not really a country-to-country competition, because the total outsourcing market is increasing. The whole pie is increasing every year. In fact, estimates are that of the total addressable transactional work worldwide, only 1/3 has so far been offshore or outsourced. So there's still a way to go. And a few developments I just wanted to brief you on. To the surprise of some industry players, we actually will achieve the 2016 roadmap that was made 5 years ago, which will call for a revenue of $25 billion coming in at the end of next year, 3 million Filipinos directly employed. So our interest association, the IT and Business Processing Association of the Philippines, has kicked off the work on a 2022 roadmap by inviting interest and offers from the usual consultants assisting us with this, simply trying to gaze into the crystal ball and see what could be out there for this industry in 6 years. Quite a tall order. Another development that's interesting to see is what I term the race to the province. We have at least 20 to 25,000 new jobs created every year outside of Metro Manila, on top of the 100,000 or so in Metro Manila every year. This is partly because of cost. It's partly because of increasing talent crunch in certain sectors in Metro Manila, so that companies prefer to set up directly outside. We talk about cities like Cebu, Bacolod, Clark, Davao, etc. There are many Philippine cities with great universities, and the industry is beginning to discover this. The government set a target a couple of years ago of trying to get to a 60-40 split, meaning 60% of all this activity should be in Metro Manila and no less than 40% in the provinces. We are now at about 80% to 20, so there's a way to go, but it's an interesting new development, not without its challenges. If you're the first locator, first big BPM company in a small city in terms of transport, etc., but the development is definitely taking place, and we are also then the drivers of growth. When a big company is there, you see a shopping mall coming, then you see transport routes coming, etc. The third bullet point I put is RPA, or Robotic Process Automation. This is increasingly the talk of the industry, because more and more can be done by automation. It is a particular concern to the call center segment, because more and more companies create web tools enabling their clients to do things by self-service online. They don't need to talk to anybody. We had our last big industry discussion on that in October last year. The conclusion was that RPA is probably not yet a threat to this industry. Probably it is still just assisting people to service clients more than actually taking their jobs. But RPA is something to keep an eye out for in this industry, for those who are planning the future of this industry. Then there are also, of course, a couple of challenges of working in the Philippines. One is cost and speed of internet. We have one of the slowest internet speeds in Asia, and it's at the same time quite costly. Also, this we are trying to address with government. We'll get a new government this year, and we'll have to start over again. But there is increasingly focus on this, and gradually we hope that also this industry should be able to benefit from technological advancements in the rest of the world. There is certainly also, as I mentioned before, increasingly a challenge on talent, particularly in the middle management. It goes without saying, really, that if we add 100,000 people in this industry every year, we should need about 5,000 team leaders and maybe at least 500 managers, etc. So this industry is increasingly now drawing on talent from the traditional industries that have nothing to do with business process management. I understand even that they are beginning to complain. We are taking the IT people and the finance people, etc., into this industry. So far, companies have been able to manage, because we have at the same time also Filipinos returning from employment overseas, and they can increasingly find the well-paid jobs in the Philippines that they used to leave for Singapore, for Dubai or Europe to find these jobs. So it is so far not a major issue, but it is partly the reason for the race to the province, to try to really tap the good universities in the province, bring the jobs to where the people are. The final new development, or fairly new, is DICT. That stands for Department of ICT. We have, unlike most countries around us, not a dedicated department or ministry dealing with ICT or having it as its main area of responsibility. And we have been lobbying for this the last 3 or 4 years as Chambers of Commerce. We are almost there. The new bill, the new law, is agreed between the 2 houses of Congress as the Senate version, and it is actually now in front of the President for signing. We really hope he will do that before he ends his term in June. Finally, just an overview of some of the large current European shared service centers. Many have chosen to set up here directly and not outsource to a third party, but set up their own shared service centers. And from what I hear, everybody finds this a great place to be, and centers keep growing. Once you have a few hundred employees, it is a very compelling cost picture to add more functions, and therefore we do see that companies often start with simple transactional work, or even call center work, customer service work, But then they have finance and accounting, business analytics, procurement, anything really can be done here. In my 9 years of dealing with this industry in the Philippines, I have learned that anything that is not customer facing, such as sales call or some customer service functions, can be moved offshore. And these are some of the companies that have several hundred to several thousand employees. There are many others, but these are just some of the large European operations here. There is no doubt a lot more to talk about, but I think we should get on with the agenda and save some of your questions via chat till the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erik, for the overview. Now, when we have an idea of the industry, we can move forward to hearing more about how it is to run a business here. And the next one in line is Uffe Henrichsen. So he used to run his own company here, which got acquired by NNIT, and now has been the general manager for NNIT Philippines ever since. So Uffe, please.
Thank you, Joni. Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon to those of you here in the local time zone. So my name is Uffe Henrichsen, and I was asked to talk a little bit about my experience running a software setup here in the Philippines. And I thought maybe I could start with just giving a little bit of background as to who I am, to give some context. So I've been here for 18, almost 19 years now. I initially came out, worked as an IT consultant and then as an IT manager, and started a small department making internal software development. This was actually a Japanese company. From there we we spun out that unit and formed a company, some of us that worked there, and so that became a local software development company. This company was focused really on developing solutions for particularly the European market. That was in 2005. Then in 2009, we were acquired by, at that time, our biggest customer, which is a Danish IT services firm called NNIT. I chose to stay on along with my co-founders of Corporate, and that's where I work today. So to kind of give some context, I've been both on the side of small business and also worked in the other scale at a larger company, but as captive here in the Philippines, working now for Asia. So to talk a little bit about my experiences here. Well, first of all, as Erik also mentioned, the Philippines it's a sunshine industry in the Philippines, and in many ways the Philippines is a young country. When I first arrived here, just as an example, computers were taxed as luxury items. So you can imagine that if you tax a PC the same way that you tax a luxury handbag, not that many people have them. And for that reason, there really wasn't that many IT professionals, especially older IT professionals here at the time. So this industry has really grown up during, I wouldn't say that it started from nothing, but certainly it was very, very young at that time and developed and matured during those 18 years that I've been here, and I've been fortunate to be a part of that. What I have experienced leading a software team here is that, first of all, the Philippine culture is one of creativity and sort of quite dynamic. Again, most people are still very young. It's a young country. A lot of people under 25. So there's a large group of fresh graduates that graduate every year, and they're fairly adaptable. At least in my experience, especially when we were a small company, we could take some of the people we'd hired for, let's say, a software development position, and easily ask them to do testing or do other things. They were quite fairly flexible in that sense. They were also extremely hardworking and loyal. They stayed for many years and actually worked many times through weekends and so on. So there's really some good values there. So on the flip side, some of the key challenges that we encounter is, of course, because of the growth in the industry, there really is, as Erik also pointed out, a scarcity of senior people, both management and technology. And this is quite natural, of course, when the industry grows as fast as it does. You're going to have a run on those types of people. And just to go back to my earlier point that when I got here, computers were so expensive. This also explains why, at that time, I don't think there were any, or there weren't many IT professionals over 30, simply because they'd grown up during a different time. And those that were qualified and were trained were mostly abroad. Some, of course, chose to come back, but it was a real challenge. That has changed a lot since. Now we have a fairly mature industry, and you can get most of the fairly complex technologies you can find resources for here. But the senior ones are still in demand, for sure. The other sort of challenge we have is infrastructure, both in terms of internet connectivity and in terms of physical traffic. Again, part of it is a challenge provided by growth, but it's certainly something that affects business, and you have to kind of be aware of and take into account. The last thing I just want to point out is I think we in the Philippines could do more on IT education in schools. It has certainly improved a lot, but there's still some room to grow there. We find that in most cases when we hire fresh graduates, we need to do a lot of training, and I think that is the same for probably most companies here. Having said that, as Erik mentioned, there's about 1.3 million in the entire BPO industry directly employed. There's 100 million people in the country. There is still an enormous potential for developing this industry. All right, so that's a little bit about the general stuff. Now, I wanted to list down or talk a little bit about some of the recommendations based on my experience and what works and maybe what you should try and avoid. I'm not sure that any of this is specific to the Philippines, but certainly some of it might be. But in this, I'm assuming that your intent in listening to this is to look for some sort of onshore, offshore setup. And that's kind of the experience I've had, so that's what I'll talk about. So point number one, it takes a diverse team. I experienced a lot of people that I talk to say, well, I just need a group of developers, and that in a consulting setup or an onshore setup where you're close to the customer may well be the case, because the developers can talk directly to the customers, whether they're internal or external, and they can do a lot of the work that sort of is also needed in a software team. Generally, with offshore teams, you need to have more different roles. So you need analysts, you need testers, you need user experience people, DevOps, this kind of thing. So you have to take that into account, that it's a broader team than just simply developers. Second thing I've written is pyramid, not diamond-shaped teams. And what I mean by that is capitalize on the inherent strengths of the Philippines. So I mentioned that the Philippines, perhaps if you look at the difference in salary scales from fresh graduates all the way up to senior people, the difference is maybe at 5 to 10 times. So really, the senior guys are much more expensive than the junior guys. So if you want to have a sort of the best possible setup financially, it makes sense to try and utilize as many of the more junior people that you can, and that requires some design in how you build your organization, your teams. Thirdly, this at least has been my experience. It's good to have some process, of course, but it really is about people. And if you don't get the people thing right, the processes won't help you. I've experienced some companies assume that if they have all the processes, they're CMI certified and so on, that things will fall into place automatically. In my experience, it won't. The only way things will work is if you have a dynamic team where people trust each other and communicate well. So invest in that. Invest in training people and for them to get to know each other. Next point is expect that you're not going to get the same level of productivity when you work offshore that you do when you work simply as an onshore team. And that is driven by many things, the time zones and how close you are to the customer, how well you understand their requirements, and general communication and language issues. That you need to build into your business case, because that is a reality that is difficult to avoid. You can try and optimize it and fine-tune it, but it is hard. So build it in. There's still lots of room for cost optimization, cost saving, in any case, just in the nature of offshoring the work to the Philippines. So be prepared for that. And lastly, avoid the temptation to simply move the stuff that the guys on your end in Europe or wherever you happen to be, the stuff that they don't want to do. This is not a question of who likes to do some stuff and who doesn't like to do some stuff. This is a question of what makes sense. And in order to get buy-in and get productivity, you also need to sometimes move the more difficult things and create a sense of ownership on the offshore and here in the Philippines. And lastly, a few more things about how do you actually build teams then. So once you've got your basics set up, my experience has been, again, build teams with shared goals. You know, that people need to know that they're on the same side, that they're not competing against each other, that they are striving for the same thing, and if they run into trouble, then they must solve those things together. Invest in collaboration tools, for people to be able to easily talk to each other. Invest in travel so that they can get to know each other. Those things pay off in the long run if you do that in the beginning. And lastly, if you're not in an English-speaking country, insist on English. Otherwise, you will get some people that are insiders and some people that are outside. So you must insist on English even on the onshore side. The last thing I would say is really it's about communication. You know, if you do that well and communicate and people communicate within the team, they will work things out and they will solve the problems. If the communication breaks down, then as I said, really not a lot can help you. So that's what I have. If you have any questions, please write them in, and I'll try to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Uffe, for your insights. Now we heard about the side of the business when you're running an IT outsourcing operation, and now we move onwards in our agenda to actually hear about how the Philippine market is for a vendor and implementer of an IT solution. So, Bo Lundqvist, please.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. Again, my name is Bo Lundqvist. I'm Swedish. I have a background about me. I've been here for 18 years, just like Uffe. I started a little differently by actually working for a number of IT firms until I decided to start my own firm in 2006. And that's what I've been doing pretty much since then. Now, my bit here is discussing a few learning points from running a business within the Philippines. Our focus is to sell IT solutions to the Philippine market, and my staff is all Filipinos. I'm the only white guy on board, and so those will be the learnings here. Let's see. That was that slide, yeah. So, yeah, okay, so my company is called Retail Software Associates, and as I said, it's founded in 2006. We're a Microsoft partner. We deal with something called LS Retail Nav, which is a retail enterprise management solution. So our typical customers here would be mid-sized to large retailers. And for you to perhaps get a view of that, we've done companies like Starbucks, for example, that gives you more or less a clue of the kind of retailers that we serve here. The first thing to maybe discuss, and some of this has been said by Erik and Uffe, we have a young and we have a large population and a growing population. Major plus point here, especially if you're a foreigner like me, is that everyone, and literally everyone, speaks English, maybe to certain degrees, the same English as we do, but definitely it is easy to communicate, it's easy to be understood, and it's easy to understand what goes on here, what people tell you. We have, over the past years, typically under this administration, had an economy that's been growing by leaps and bounds, and that's been good for many Filipinos. You heard Erik talk about a growing middle class, which is definitely something new over the past couple of years here, and that translates into a lot of new work opportunities in the Philippines, but also a lot of opportunities for us that offer IT solutions in the local market. There is still, however, a lot of differences between those that have and those that do not have. Poverty is still big in the Philippines and is not an inclusive growth by any standards. Also, something to consider is that, from a European perspective, we take social benefits for granted. Here, very, very little. So perhaps the priorities of people here may be a little different in terms of how to do their savings, how to take their decisions around salary, etc. So the first thing to be discussed here is the opportunity. I will talk to you about this in terms of my industry, which is to offer IT solutions for retailers in particular. This may, of course, vary depending on what kind of IT solution that you, or IT market that you play in. But my story will be around retail, as I said. The growth in economy has certainly led to a lot of more spending power, especially in IT. We have a real estate boom, we have malls coming up everywhere, and we do have a lifestyle here in the Philippines that is certainly focused around outdoor, being outdoor in the malls, being outdoor in stores, shopping, eating, etc. So it is a retail-centric lifestyle, which, with a growing population, obviously creates a great opportunity for retailers and thereby IT providers like me. A lot of retailing firms that are growing because of this needs new solutions, and that creates a market and an opportunity for folks like us. We have 7,000 islands to deal with, and 7,000 islands creates issues in terms of supply chain, in terms of communications, and that again creates a need for IT solutions to sort of make sure that those stores and those warehouses, etc., are connected properly. Another thing that we deal a lot with is fraud detection and management. So when you look at having hundreds of stores and you want to keep control over that, then IT is one of those systems and one of those solutions to making sure that you know what's going on in your stores and that being shortchanged. Lastly, most of retail business, as in many other industries, is family-owned in the Philippines. So typically, the larger corporations here are families, multiple generations that runs them. What has happened lately is the second or third generation are typically younger and more IT savvy and typically more likely to invest in IT than their parents that would run the business before them. So that's a little bit of the opportunity. A couple of the challenges, though, because there are challenges to run local business here in the Philippines too, is, as Uffe just mentioned, it is difficult to find senior resources. Typically, as they get senior, they will look for opportunities. They have been looking for opportunities outside the Philippines. So basically, if you run a business here, you've got to be prepared to do a lot of training. You have to find good people, but you have to be prepared to train them quite a lot, actually, until they become as senior as you need them for the business. And that creates another problem, and that is how do you keep them? Because as they then become valuable, they become valuable outside the Philippines as well. So that's another challenge. One thing to be pointed out is just because you send an invoice in the Philippines, it doesn't mean that you get paid. So payments and collections, major issue for anyone that does business here, and something that we spend a lot of time on doing in the local business. Government relations takes a lot of time and toll on your admin to deal with all the requirements of the government here. So that's something that you have to be prepared to invest in resources in dealing with as well. We've talked about the poor IT infrastructure in the Philippines. Erik mentioned something about that. That is, of course, difficult when you look at how most IT systems are designed today, where we sometimes take internet access, for example, or high-speed internet access for granted. That is far from how it is in some places in the Philippines. So you have to be quite innovative to be able to deploy systems across the geography of the Philippines. A challenge that I face is also the lack of education in terms of those that buy IT here. It is not to be taken for granted that the decision makers actually understand what we're trying to sell them and the solutions that we offer. And that's sometimes part of the selling job is to educate them of what is available and why what we have perhaps would be a better option than others. Competition, sometimes or quite often not necessarily based on facts and figures, but rather who knows who and who can come up with the cheapest price. So sometimes it is not as easy as proving that you're the best vendor. That may not be the deciding factor in the Philippines. And cutting corners as it relates to IT is sometimes a common practice, which is a challenge if you try to sort of deploy a global parity in terms of IT solutions. Now, I'm going to build on what Uffe talked about in terms of building a team, because if you're going to sell solutions there, at least from our perspective, our by far greatest revenue is to sell consulting services. My experience is that you really need to find a core team of very loyal and highly senior persons that you can relate to and that you know will be with you for the long run. In my case, I have folks with me that have been working with me in 3 companies by now. They just follow me and eventually ended up in my company. And these people I know in and out, and they know me. And basically, if other employees comes and goes, at least I have a core team to rely on, and that I think has been very important for me in building my business. Office location, big issue when you hire. Transportation here is difficult. So as you look at where you want to set up, you need to think not how you get there, but how your staff will get to the office. That's a key strategy, a key part of whether they want to work with you or not. Recruitment, difficult. I would recommend try to find and hire a recruiter rather than rely on headhunters. I would definitely spend money on Salesforce, local Salesforce, high-end Salesforce to be able to deal with the local opportunities for you. One thing when you deal with staff here is in much more terms, Filipinos will look at the company they work for as some sort of an extended family. So a positive work environment, a lot of activities together is important to them. Far more important, I think, than in Europe, where we pretty much go to the office, get paid, and go home again. In that regard, I find creating challenges consistently and maybe smaller career steps upwards, smaller increases quite often, more often than the annual performance appraisal has been successful, and it keeps me happy and excited working for us. Being on time is a challenge here. My recommendation would be create an atmosphere and a culture of on time from the very beginning, so that is a given in your office environment, or else you will be facing delays and non-delivery. There. So last, how do you, a couple of tips and tricks, how do you run a local business though? I think to be able to succeed here, if you decide to invest in the Philippines, you really need to find a concept that is hard to copy. There's always a next guy that's very willing to take over your business. If you have a solution or a specific competency that is unique, then that is probably the way to establish yourself. Customers needs to be treated as family. The Philippines is a small place. Bad and good news travels very quickly in the local market, and a word of recommendation is selling a lot more than any marketing campaign that you can possibly think of here. Most businesses, especially in my industry, is run by families. So if you want to be successful here, you got to be able to deal and break into those families and get to know family members, because those decision makers may be a little different than elsewhere. Delays, non-decision, very common. You have to just deal with it. I think lastly, we have sometimes the culture here is not as straightforward as we are in Europe. So you got to be prepared for that. A yes may mean no, and a no may mean yes in the Philippines. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Bo. Very interesting look to the end market here in the Philippines. So, do we have any questions from the audience at the moment? No. So please type into the chat if you have any questions regarding this. I have one to Erik. You mentioned that the market is not competing. It's not a competition between the countries, but Philippines is the #1 in voice services, #2 in non-voice services after India. How would you compare these two countries? What are the biggest benefits for the Philippines, and are they able to catch up with India at some point? What's your view on it?
Right. Thank you, Joni. Well, there are certainly similarities, but also quite some differences between India and the Philippines as outsourcing destinations. The Philippines tend to be really strong in customer service, in something that deals with the spoken language. We, as was mentioned already by Uffe and Bo, we have really good English skills here, and many companies take advantage of that. The fact that the Philippines was able to overtake India as a call center country already in 2010 was really mainly because more than a dozen Indian call center companies set up shop here in order to tap the talent. And this leads me to one important difference. There is generally higher staff retention in the Philippines. Filipinos are generally quite loyal to their employer, to the company. As Bo mentioned, we have to always create almost a familiar feeling, do family day arrangements, annual staff outings, reward and recognition programs, etc. And that builds loyalty, more so here than in India. Also because by the fabric of society, we have a very sort of collective mentality. Move in groups, they work in groups, they go out in groups. It is more family feeling of close friends than in Europe or India, where we're used to more individualistic way of thinking. And we have to take that into account when rewarding people for excellent ideas, for example. I would say other differences could be that India, to be fair, is generally stronger on education in science and in math and in certain disciplines needed for example, business analytics, for some IT development work, where India is far ahead of the Philippines. And of course, they will always have a population 10 times or 12 times the size of ours. So, of course, the talent will always be there to a larger extent than the Philippines. Interestingly, I've heard that in the call center segment, again, our strength and 2/3 of what's going on here, the Philippines is really good at attaching analytics to this, so that the moment a call center agent is on the phone with a client, he has immediately, or she has immediately on the screen, an overview of this client, what was the last issues, what was resolved, everything about this client, and also feeding analytics back to the final clients of the call center, which are often in the USA. So I don't think, to get back to your question, I think we can never catch up to India in this sense, because they are way more than $100 billion of annual revenue. We are proudly now at $22 billion, and we keep growing, but we can jointly, drawing on our respective strengths, we can jointly grow the entire outsourcing market. There is still a long way to go.
Thank you, Erik. for that. And I have one question to Uffe, partly also to Bo. You mentioned that it's hard to find the senior manager and people to the senior roles here. Is the government direction to attract more high-end back office operations to the country? How do you see that happening if there's no senior workers available? Is it possible to get more high-end operations here, or are we stuck in the low end end of it?
Well, I think as I mentioned, it is of course a young and growing industry, and I think that talent is being developed. You know, all of the companies that are here, we are all part of this education process and development of managers and of senior technical people. To be honest, I don't think that the government can really do all that much. I think the government has for sure a role in the basic education, but that doesn't really help us, at least in the short term, with the senior technical resources. That would help us in the slightly longer run. What I think the government can do is, and I think what they are actually doing a fairly good job at, is enabling or facilitating that we can easily bring in those types of profiles if we cannot find them locally. And I think over time we will develop more and more of these senior technical profiles. But obviously this is an issue that is driven primarily by high growth. So in that sense, it's a positive problem, you could say.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question to Bo, so that we get him on stage as well. You talked about the retail IT solutions from your own point of view, but do you see any other subsectors within the IT scape here in the Philippines, where European developers would be in need, and some sectors which are not represented well, or there's a huge demand for some certain IT solutions?
Any form of IT infrastructure here is in great need, and the skills are scarce. So there are multiple specializations, obviously, in terms of IT infrastructure. Telecom, relating to what Erik has presented, is obviously big here, but and that may be to the BPO industry. But for the local companies that are not in the BPO industry, the same need is there, perhaps in less scale. But still, there's a lot that can be done in terms of the actual IT infrastructure, the backbone IT, if you like. The other thing that comes to mind straight away would be IT security. So all aspects of securing that infrastructure. In my opinion, there is very, very little local skills, local solutions in those areas, and there's certainly room for any European vendor to come in and try to help out there.
Okay, very good. I think that was it for our webinar. If you don't have any further questions, I would like to mention a few events which we are planning. So if you are attending CEBIT in Hanover in a few weeks, please visit the Philippine booth. EPBN will be represented there. You can ask more about the market. And also we are planning a trade delegation for the second half of the year. Anchor event will be the International IT BPO Summit, which is held here in Manila. So we will be sending you more information about that as well later. So thank you for attending the webinar. Hopefully it was interesting to you, and please stay in contact with us. If you have questions after this webinar, you can email them to us or ask via Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. So we get back to you the soonest. Thank you.